Today you join me at my favourite Glebe Fishery. I'm sat on pool 9, not on an hemp peg today, I've just sat towards the middle of the lake, and I'm here to demonstrate hemp and corn fishing. Sonu have recently started doing it in a tin, mixed together at a ratio round about 60-40. That's 60% hemp and 40% corn. A few words about corn and hemp fishing. The baits go hand in hand together. Obviously the hemp is the main feed. Put a bit of corn in with it as well, and the corn's a hook bait. But because it's been cooked in the same tin, it's actually cooked in there, the flavour from the hemp mixes with the corn and makes the corn even more attractive as a hook bait. It is like a big bit of hemp in a way that's been flavoured with hemp, and just makes it easy to fish with, you know, on the hook. You're not messing about trying to put hemp on or other baits. The combination does go together really well. A bit of history about the glebe and hemp. It's always been a brilliant bait to feed, not so much to use on the hook, obviously for the smaller fish, but for carp then you need to fish a standout bait over it, whereas this is where the corn comes into play. But I remember years ago, I've been a member here on and off for about 20 years now, and in the early days you used to fish the shallower lakes on the track and the foundation lake. And I remember them days when I had my hemp with me, you could literally just take a small handful of hemp, throw it in the margins, look back, and within 5 minutes of looking down in your margin again, there'd be 10 or 15 carp straight on that handful of hemp you'd thrown in. You know, it's a really good bait to feed and fish over, hemp is. The lake I'm sat on today, it's been dug out with no shells really. Anglers that fish here will tell you that it just shells off really steeply on both banks, and even the margins, there's no real flat area. So using hemp as a feed makes it ideal really, whereas lighter feed baits like pellets, corn or other baits, maggots or even ground bait that you'd want to feed and fish over, would easily roll down that shelf. But hemp being really small and really heavy for its size, it settles in what bit of silt there is on the shelf, and it will stay there until a fish eats it. So it's in your mind that you keep potting a little bit of hemp in, there's a good chance it's going to be there until it's eaten. So just positioning your hook bait on that, it's a better feed option than other baits. So I'm going to set myself a bit of a challenge today. With this 1 tin of hemp and corn, I'm going to set myself a target of around 50 pounds of fish, or as many fish as I can catch on it. So in a tin, it's mixed together, just going to rip the top off, and you can see it's just covered in the liquid that it's been cooked in, and you can see the oil on top of that, so it's full of attractants. And I'm just going to pour that in my bait bowl. And the ratio is, as I said, round about 60-40. So if I catch, you know, 50 pounds of fish on that, I'm going to be well happy. Going on to my rig, I'm only fishing one rig and in one position in my peg. Mentioned before, this is really sharp sloping, this lake, so I'm just going to be really accurate with my feed, using a small pot on the end of my pole, and every time I go in, I'm just going to load my pot up as full as I dare with the mix of hemp and corn, and just before I ship out, I'm going to press it quite hard with my thumb. It's not really going to damage the bait, because it is what it is. It's not like pellets that are going to stick hard, but it just seats in the pot nice and it stops it jumping out when you're shipping out. Not that I'm fishing a long pole, I'm not fishing the full depth of the lake. I've come well up the slope and I've found myself about 3 foot of depth. And I think that's going to be the ideal place to start fishing. Now the water's warmed up a bit, we're in springtime now, they don't really want to be down in the 6 foot of water. And I'm fishing slightly to my right to keep a bit of distance away from myself and the fish, try and get the fish confident. So there's my bait in the pot. Normally I'd hook the hook bait before I do that, so I'll just tip that out back in my pot because I don't want to waste too much, because I'm going to try and catch all my fish just using 1 tin of corn and hemp. So from the hook, I'll talk through my rig. It's really simple, and it's a standard sort of rig for any bottom fishing on a commercial. It don't really matter what the depth. Obviously you slide your float up to about 1 inch to 2 inch over depth, depending on the depth. So starting from the hook end, I've got a nice small hook, an 18. Those of you who've watched my videos in the past, I'm a real fan of small hooks, and I'll just be nicking the corn on the hook in the corner of the grain and making sure the point sticks out. And the good thing about that, you can keep lifting and dropping your float. If it's going under with liners, or if it's a bite, you'll hook it straight away, but it'll stay on because the skin's really tough. So going up from the hook bait, I've got, and this rig is like standard for all bottom fishing, regardless of the depth. So my bulk's probably 1/3 the way up from the hook, which consists of 4 number 8 stots, and halfway between that and the hook bait, I've got a number 10 dropper shot, and then 2/3 above that is my float. That's for the 3 foot of depth and fishing, so that's 3 foot away from my hook. And above my float, just mention the float because I'm a real fan of these floats. It's a 412s carp pellet, which is ideal for the depth I've decided to where I'm going to fish on this slope. The reason I like this float, it's a wire stem, makes it really super stable. It's got a nice 2mm tip. It's really strong float. The eye can't pull out by the way it's made, and the bendy the wire stem, you can bend it right round and it'll just straighten out. It won't kink. It'll just spring back out and make a really nice. You won't bend it and cause the float to tip up. Above the float, again, this is the same, whatever depth. I recommend anything from 1 foot to 18 inch. It's quite windy today, could be a bit longer if it's really windy, is the distance you want above your float, and 1/3 the way up from your float and 2/3 to your connector. Most of the time I've got a back shot on, which is a number 10, and that just keeps the line below the water, keeps everything really stable. I want my grain of corn over my bed of hemp, that's where I'm likely to get a bite. So I'm going to load up my pot again and we'll get fishing. So to start off with, I'm going to pick a generous sort of a handful out of the hemp and corn and pick an obvious grain of corn that stands out from the rest, put the rest back in my bait bowl, and I'm just going to hook it in the corner of the corn. Once that's done, I can fill my cad pot up with. I'm taking it easy for a start. I don't want to fill it right up because I'm going to try and make my bait last as long as it can, with them just using a tin today. So there I am, I can ship out now. I'm fishing slightly to the right, so I've got distance away from where I'm fishing, but I'm also in quite shallow water. And I've got a marker on the far bank which I'm exactly lining up with, and I'm dropping my rig plumb down, and as soon as the float's settled, I'm tipping my bait on the float like so. Now because the lake's towing from right to left, I'm having to put my pole further to hold the float back, else it's going to track itself out the position of where I'm feeding. And I'm using the back back shot just to keep the float in position and so it doesn't track away from my baited area. I'm trying to keep everything as tight as possible on the bottom, and also the right distance out from the bank to ensure that my piece of corn is right over my hemp and corn feed. And I'm just waiting for that sharp dink of a bite that you know, tells me there's going to be a fish on. It's asking a bit too much to catch a fish first drop, but by the way I'm feeding, just feeding with a cad pot, I've not put any, you know, any amount of bait in with a bigger pot. I've just gone in with a small cad pot, and that sometimes will bring a fish straight to it. You know, it's not scared by a big pot full of bait suddenly going in. I expect to get a bite fairly soon. It depends what sort of day it is. The water's up to about, well, middle of April, so the water's up to about 10 or 11 degrees now, so the fish should have some, you know, an appetite. A slight liner then actually, and again, but I'm waiting for that sharp sort of go under with my float. Slight liner again, so I suspect this fish comes straight onto that small pot full of feed. You'll see that the pole tip's further to the right than my float, and I'm doing that to try and keep the float over the bait that I've potted in. It's really important. The corn must be on top of the hemp and corn feed. I've not had a bite, which I've not done yet. I'm just going to bring my pole back and bring it plumb up and resettle it on the slope. That sometimes can get you a quick bite, that. So I've dropped it in, immediately put the pole upstream, if you like, of the float to hold it in position, and just sat there waiting for a bite. Fairly confident at catching this first fish on my first small pot full of bait. Just got to keep that float really still over my pot full of bait. So there's quite a heavy wind on it today, which is blowing left to right, which means that it's making the lake toe right to left. So I've got to make sure that my hook bait's on top of my feed at all times. Slight liner there is just pulling it downstream, so there's fish there, but because it's early yet, you know, there you see there's even a swell there, so I don't think it's going to be long before I get a fish. And there it goes. Not bad at all, fish first truck. I'm using the 15 holler today, which is ideally matched to the size 18 hook, no 17 power line straight through from the connector. Not really want to use hook lengths. I believe that a rig with no hook length knot in it is a stronger rig and less chance of getting broken. It's great fishing this lake because you've got deep where that fish is fighting. I've brought it out the area where I've caught it, so I'm not disturbing my feeding fish, but it drops straight off, so the fish got plenty of depth to fight in, and you can just keep it in front of you. I've immediately took the section off. I'm fishing a top kit +1, but as soon as I've hooked the fish, I've immediately took the number 3 off and just playing it on the top kit. Pulled this much elastic out, so it's tiring the fish out, and it won't be long before it's ready to net. So looks like a common. About £4 or £5 for the first fish. Can't be bad. And there you go, middle of the top lip, my favourite place to hook them. That's because I'm fishing, you know, more or less dead depth, perhaps an inch over at the most. So I was going to do an update when I got halfway through my tin of bait, but the way it's going, I've hardly used, well, I've used probably just under a third, and I've got £37 on my clicker. So I'm well in schedule, if you know what I mean. It's not all plain sailing though. I'm getting lots of liners. Some going under like bites, but I'm sure they're not bites. That's my theory. It can go under like a bite, but if you're quick enough on the strike and there's nothing there, then it's simply a liner. A lot of liners do look like liners, they go under slower, but saying that, there's a fair few that look like bites, but I'm sure they're liners. You know, that little hook just sticking out the corn, it's unlikely that a fish can take it without getting hooked. The way the session's going so far, there's a fish there, lovely bite that was. As soon as I had a pot full of bait in and I dropped my rig on it, I've got a minute to get a bite. After that, I start getting liners. You know, they've ate most of what I've potted in because it's only a small bit of bait, and then they get not as confident. So as soon as that bait comes in, settles on the bottom, there's 3 or 4 fish there, can't wait to eat it. And if my hook bait's there, in that sort of first minute, I've got every chance of catching a fish. Feels another nice fish. I'm sure what's helping me here, because I'm feeding corn and hemp mixed together, because it's sharply sloping where I'm fishing, the hemp is digging into the bottom and staying on that slope. For instance, if I was fishing and feeding 2 mils, then because they're a lot lighter, then as the fish are moving around that slope, they're going to be, you know, have a tendency to just keep going down that slope, down where it's too deep for my rig. So it's definitely helping me out. Also, what I've discovered while I've been fishing here today, I think it's the light shining on the water, but every time I pop my hemp and corn in, you see a nice plume of oil and attractants come straight up from the water, you know, and settle on the top, which is obviously a great attractor. And it's pulling a lot of fish in, and I'm well above my schedule at the minute. If I get this fish in, it's going to take me up to, looked a nice fish that I did, up to £46, £47. And they've not used a third of my bait yet, so my estimate of £50 was a bit of a lie. I just like to be on the cautious side. But it's turning into a great first hour, really. I've only been fishing an hour. It's been brilliant. Nice size fish. This is probably the biggest fish I've caught so far. Lovely condition common, that is. It's just in the side of the mouth, not quite in the top lip. Never coming off on that little hook. But you see the condition of these fish in here. £6, £7 of that. So I'll carry on fishing, and when I'm on my final few potfuls, I'll have another talk about how the session's going. I think these fish are fighting harder now the day's going on. But there's another nice fish. I'm going to try not to make it my last one because I've only got about one more pot full of bait. So I want to finish on a fish if I can help it. But you can see I'm putting him in my second net now. So I've well surpassed my target weight of £50, which I gave myself at the start of the session. I've only been fishing two and a half hours, so it's not like I've been fishing, you know, longer than that. But it just goes to show that you don't have to come. All right, it's a really good fishery, this, and it responds to a lot of bait. But it just goes to show that if you want to come pleasure fishing, or even in a match, if you just fish it like this, small bits of bait, a fish at a time, you know, just catch a fish on a pot full, then you don't need to spend a fortune on bait. For under £3, a tin of hemp corn, you know, is a great way to fish one area of your peg. All right, there will be days when pellets, you know, maggots and ground bait probably will beat this, but it's definitely a method that's worth, you know, having this bait in your bucket for the option. If you draw a peg where you think it's going to work, it's definitely been, well, I've shown it's been productive here. I'm looking at about £70–80 now. I might just scrape another pot full of bait after this one. If I don't catch a fish this time, I'm going to try my best to catch one more fish on this, and then I'm going to call it a day. It's became noticeable today, because I've been potting in really accurate on that far bank marker and presenting my bait right on top of it, that I've been getting a few too many liners later on in the session. And I put that down to fishing in 3 feet of water. I think now, although it was a great place to start at, I can catch early there, the fish are coming up the slope to intercept my bait. I think now I should be moving nearer the margin, where I've got like probably a foot less depth. It's just going to cut down on the liners, and you know, I'll get more bites and catch more fish. The reason why I've not really done that today with my second rig I've got set up is because the camera I'm speaking to is right next to the margin, and the cameraman's bobbing about to his other camera, which is going to make the fish feel a bit uneasy. But I'm still catching steady, but I'm hitting sort of every in 5 indications I'm getting the fish. You know, I'm lifting out to liners, which some look like bites, but I believe they're not. It's just that they're going under like bites. But if there's not a fish on then most of the time it's a liner. I'm just fishing. I'm on my very last pot full of bait now, and I really want to end on a nice fish. just to make the perfect day. It's been a brilliant session. I've only been fishing no more than 3 hours and I'm looking at £80 and well into my second net now. Again, if I've not had a bite within, you know, a minute or 2 minutes or so, which is the ideal time to get a bite, you've got to get your corn right straight down on that pot of bait, then I've found it noticeable if just pick your rig up and drop it back down exactly where you've been potting the bait, and that's been a great way to get a bite today. And because the toe's going from right to left, even if you're trying to hold it back with your pole top and your back shot, it does keep tramming through a bit, and it's just taking the hook bait out of the area where I've been potting in. So when you suspect, you know, that your corn's not in the area it needs to be, then just lift the rig out right on that marker on the far bank. You notice to keep looking at that marker, drop the rig back in, and any second now is a good time to get a bite. It's just as the corn falls and the fish notices it, just like that. So hopefully this last fish can make the end of a really enjoyable session. Oh, it's a bream. Doesn't matter, it's a nice sized bream. I normally put these back, so I'm not going to put it in my net, just for fish welfare really. Return safely. So I hope you've seen what a brilliant combination hemp and corn can be. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.